Amid the relentless rain hammering Lexington Avenue, Serena Carter was exhausted but far from defeated. Years of grueling double shifts at the small, worn-down diner had toughened her body, but her heart remained soft. Her kindness was a quiet rebellion against a world that seemed to take more than it gave. It was past 11 p.m., and the diner's neon sign cast a dim, flickering glow. Most of the customers had left, the last of the coffee-stained cups cleared away. Serena wiped the counter, her chestnut skin glistening with the sweat of a 12-hour shift. Just as she reached for her bag, a glimpse outside caught her eye, a small, shivering figure hunched in a battered wheelchair. The boy's hair clung to his forehead, drenched from the unforgiving rain. His coat, tattered and thin, seemed to fight a losing battle against the cold. He gripped a frayed blanket, his blue eyes darting nervously as if searching for something or someone. Serena's heart squeezed. No one should be out here alone, especially not a child. She pushed the door open, shivering as the icy wind stung her skin. "Hey, sweetie," she called softly, kneeling beside him. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy flinched, his eyes widening. For a moment, Serena feared he might bolt, but then his shoulders sagged, defeated. "I'm waiting for my dad," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. Serena's gaze swept the street, nothing but the glimmer of a pawn shop's flickering "cash for gold" sign and the sound of tires hissing on wet asphalt. The street was empty, as hollow as a broken promise. "Where is he?" she pressed gently, concern threading through her words. The boy shrugged, clutching his thin blanket tighter. Serena had seen this too many times. Promises made to children left standing in the rain, believing in a love that never showed up. Her heart ached, a dull, familiar pain. "You can't stay out here, sweetheart." "Not like this," she said softly. A warm, reassuring smile spread across her face. "Come inside with me. It's warm, and I've got something special just for you." His hesitation lingered, but the pull of warmth and kindness broke through. Slowly he nodded. Serena took hold of the wheelchair's handles, guiding him inside the diner. The warmth enveloped them, the scent of buttered toast and burnt coffee hanging in the air like a comforting memory. Serena led him to a booth near the radiator, draping a fresh towel over his soaked shoulders. She crouched down to his level, her eyes gentle and steady. "My name's Serena. What's yours, sweetheart?" He sniffed, his fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. "Daniel," he whispered. "Daniel," she repeated with a smile. "That's a strong name. You hungry?" He nodded shyly. Serena didn't need to ask twice. In minutes, she had a steaming plate in front of him, a grilled cheese sandwich, golden and crisp, with a bowl of tomato soup beside it. Her grandmother's recipe, her own comfort on long, lonely nights. "This one's on me," she said, tucking a napkin into his lap. Daniel's eyes widened as he took his first bite. The cheese stretched in gooey strings, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the soup. "This is the best thing I've ever had," he whispered, a glimmer of wonder breaking through his guarded demeanor. Serena chuckled, a sound as gentle as the rain outside. "Good food makes everything a little better," she said lightly. Yet inside, she felt that familiar ache, the one that appeared whenever she saw someone so small already carrying a weight too heavy for their shoulders. But what Serena didn't know was that across the street, a pair of watchful eyes had witnessed every act of her quiet kindness. Inside a sleek, black Bentley, the boy's father sat in silence, the rain streaming down the windows like tears. In that moment, a simple act of compassion had set in motion a change that would alter Serena's life forever. A kindness seen, a heart moved, and a future about to unfold in ways she had never imagined. Rain drummed relentlessly on the cracked pavement of Lexington Avenue, its icy touch seeping into every crevice. mirroring the harshness of the world outside. Inside the sleek, black Bentley parked across the street, Raymond Holt's sharp gray eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding before him. At 46, Raymond was a man defined by precision and control, a billionaire who built Holt Dynamics from the ground up. His empire ran on efficiency, not sentiment, and any form of weakness had no place in his carefully constructed world. Yet, there he sat, watching a moment of raw, unguarded kindness, a moment that defied his rigid principles. His son, Daniel, sat inside the worn-down diner, laughter spilling from his lips for the first time that night. A tired but warm-hearted waitress wiped soup stains from his chin, her gentle smile lighting up the dim, flickering space. Her chestnut skin glistened with the sweat of a long shift, but her warmth cut through the rain's chill. Raymond's jaw tightened. He had been delayed by a call, an emergency with his investors in Japan. He had told Daniel to wait by the diner for just a few minutes. He hadn't expected this. With calculated precision, he reached for his phone, his fingers steady. "Nora," he commanded when his assistant picked up, "get down to Lexington Diner. No suits, no heels. I need you there in 20 minutes. A hesitant pause hung on the line. "Sir?" Raymond's grip on the phone tightened. "Find out everything you can about the woman who just fed my son." He hung up, his gaze never leaving the diner window. Inside, Serena Carter watched Daniel polish off the last bite of his grilled cheese. The boy's fingers, no longer trembling, wrapped around his glass of milk. His guarded, weary look had softened. For Serena, that was enough. A small act of kindness, a moment of warmth in a world that often felt cold. The diner door swung open, a rush of cold air pushing in. A woman stepped inside, out of place but confidently so, blonde hair tucked beneath a faded Orioles cap, jeans and a hoodie that failed to soften her sharp, assessing gaze. Her eyes landed on Daniel, and for a split second, her expression softened. "Hey champ, time to go," she said brightly, but there was something calculated in her tone, too smooth, too practiced. Daniel's smile faltered. "But I haven't finished my milk." The woman, Nora, though Serena didn't know her name yet, tilted her head, her polished smile unyielding. "You can take it with you. Your ride's waiting." Serena's instincts bristled. She had worked in this diner long enough to spot a person whose intentions didn't match their words. She had seen too many people brushed aside, erased without a second thought. People like her, who weren't expected to ask questions. Serena folded her arms, her gaze steady. "You know him?" The woman's smile didn't waver, but there was a tightening of her shoulders, a barely perceptible shift. "Yeah," she replied smoothly. "I'm his aunt." Serena's eyes narrowed, her voice firm but calm. She turned to Daniel, her expression gentle but searching. "Is that true, sweetheart?" Daniel hesitated, a beat too long. The smile on Nora's face faltered, the thin veneer of confidence cracking. Serena recognized it instantly, that flicker of fear, the silent plea for protection. She knew what it meant when a child hesitated, caught between fear and truth. She had lived it herself. Just then, the rain hammered harder against the glass, a relentless, unyielding force. Outside, Raymond watched, his expression unreadable, but his mind already calculating. To him, kindness was a currency, a debt to be repaid. Whether she realized it or not, Serena Carter had just entered his world, a world where debts were never left unsettled. And in that moment, the lives of Serena, Daniel, and Raymond began to intertwine, bound by a kindness that Raymond had never believed in and a choice that Serena could never take back. Rain hammered against the cracked pavement, each drop heavy and relentless, as if the sky itself was warning her. The chill seeped through Serena's thin sneakers, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still back at the diner, replaying every second of that unsettling encounter. When that woman walked in, sharp-eyed, too smooth, Serena's instincts had flared. She had crouched beside Daniel, her voice a gentle shield. "You good, baby?" she had asked softly, her gaze steady on his uncertain eyes. "You want to go with her?" Daniel's small fingers had gripped the napkin, knuckles going white. For a heartbeat, Serena saw the hesitation, a silent, pleading pause. "She's here for my dad," he mumbled, his voice shrinking. "I guess I have to." Serena's chest had tightened. Her gut screamed to push harder, to demand answers, to be sure. But she knew the cost of pressing too far. The stares, the accusations, the quick path from protector to troublemaker. She'd seen it too many times before. A black woman asking the wrong questions, getting the wrong kind of attention. Yet she couldn't let him leave empty-handed. She had walked to the counter, grabbed a chocolate chip cookie, wrapped it in wax paper, and slid it into Daniel's small hand. "For the road," she whispered. His fingers curled around it, and for the first time that night, a smile broke through. "Thanks, Serena. You're the best." She had forced a smile, but something inside her twisted tight. As Nora guided Daniel toward the door, a quiet tension hung between them, thick, sharp, suffocating. Then, just before they stepped into the rain, Nora glanced back. No words, just a look, a hard, unspoken warning. Serena knew that look. She had lived that look. Outside, the Bentley's headlights cut through the rain, flashing like a signal. The rear door swung open before Nora could knock, and Raymond stepped out, broad, imposing, the neon diner's glow outlining his sharp silhouette. Daniel slipped inside, buckled and safe in the back seat. Raymond's gaze didn't follow his son, it pierced into Nora instead. "Well?" His voice was steady, ice-cold. Nora exhaled, her breath misting in the night air. "She's sharp," she admitted. "Didn't buy the aunt story. Almost called me out." Raymond's expression remained unreadable. "But she let him go," Nora added. "She didn't have a choice. You know how it is, a black woman causing a scene? She would have been the one in trouble, not me." Raymond's jaw tightened, a flicker of something unreadable flashing across his face. "She's not like the others," Nora murmured, a hint of warning in her tone. Raymond already knew. He had seen it, the way Serena's warmth broke through Daniel's guarded shell, the way she didn't flinch from protecting a child she barely knew. She didn't care about his wealth, his power. To her, Daniel wasn't a tool or a connection. He was just a boy who needed kindness. That made her dangerous. Raymond slid into the car, his voice low, deliberate. "I want everything on her. Name, address, background. I want it on my desk by morning." Nora hesitated, a beat too long. "Sir, by morning," he repeated, his tone final. The Bentley pulled away, the diner shrinking into the rain-soaked night. Raymond's gaze stayed locked ahead, but his mind circled back to Serena Carter, the woman who didn't belong in his world yet had, unknowingly, forced her way into it. Serena's apartment on West Fayette Street was a worn-down sanctuary, peeling walls, unreliable heat, a creaky floor that complained with every step. The weight of the day's meager tips barely filled her pocket, but that didn't bother her. What clung to her instead was the memory of Daniel's hesitant eyes and Nora's polished smile. Serena had learned not to meddle, not to push when the world was watching. But this felt different. This felt wrong. The quiet of her apartment pressed in around her. She leaned against the door, rubbing her face, the rain still echoing in her ears. Her mother's voice whispered in her mind, a caution she had heard all her life. "Don't get involved in what ain't your business, Serena. This world don't care about girls like us." But this was a child who had looked at her like she was a lifeline. A sudden knock jolted her. Her heart leaped to her throat. No one ever came here, especially not this late. Her fingers tightened around the doorknob, hesitant, breath caught. The air felt colder, the silence heavy. For a moment, she thought of Daniel, his uncertain eyes. Then, slowly, she turned the lock and opened the door. Serena's fingers trembled slightly as she peered through the peephole. Her tired eyes met the sight of a man on the other side, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a black coat that looked more expensive than her entire rent. His face was sharp and composed, but his eyes, gray, cold, and calculating, seemed to assess her, dissecting her in a heartbeat. Her heart pounded. She didn't open the door. "Who is it?" she called out, voice steadier than she felt. The pause. Then a voice, deep, measured, too controlled. "Raymond Holt." The name meant nothing. If it was meant to impress, it failed. "What do you want?" Her hand tightened on the lock. Another pause. More deliberate. "To talk." Her instincts screamed hell no, but curiosity crept in. The same restless curiosity that had gotten her in trouble more times than she could count. Cautiously, she unlatched the door, opening it just enough to see his face clearly. He didn't belong here. Not in this crumbling building, not on this side of the city, and definitely not in her life. "I don't know you," she said, voice flat. His expression remained steady. "No, but you know my son." Her pulse stuttered. The weight of his presence, the pristine, polished shoes beneath his rain-dampened coat, the air of power that wrapped around him like armor, it all screamed danger. Money. Control. The kind that could ruin lives without a word. "Daniel?" she asked slowly. "You're his father?" A slight nod, barely a movement. "I was across the street last night." The chill that had been lodged in her bones twisted into something sharper. "You were watching?" "I was." She exhaled sharply, a mix of frustration and unease. "So what? You here to complain because I fed your kid?" His gaze flickered, unreadable. "No. I'm here because I don't believe in charity," he said evenly. "But I do believe in paying debts." Before she could respond, he reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope, and placed it on her rickety kitchen table. The sound of it hitting the worn wood felt heavier than it should have. Serena's eyes fell to the envelope, thick, heavy, made of expensive paper that felt out of place in her world. She swallowed hard. "What is that?" "A job offer." Her mind stalled. She blinked, the weight of his words pressing against her. "I what?" Raymond's gaze remained steady, unyielding. "A job at HT Dynamics. 6 figures. Benefits. The works." A sharp, incredulous laugh escaped her. "You think I want to work for some rich white man who thinks throwing money around makes us even?" His expression didn't flinch. "I don't think you want charity, Serena. That's why I'm not offering it." Her name in his mouth felt invasive, like a thread he had no right to pull. She folded her arms, a flimsy barrier against the whirlwind his presence had stirred. "You don't even know me." His eyes remained fixed, unwavering. "I know enough. I know you gave my son food without expecting anything in return. I know you didn't treat him like a burden. I know that's rare." The weight of his words curled around her chest, digging into the spaces she had long kept guarded. Her eyes flicked back to the envelope, sitting there with a heaviness that mocked her pride. "And what exactly would I be doing at HT Dynamics?" she managed, her voice thinner than she wanted. "Making coffee?" For a moment, a hint of amusement danced across his face before it disappeared. "No. You'd be working directly with me, handling negotiations, public relations. You're good with people. I need someone like that." Serena let out a sharp breath, disbelief mixing with frustration. "You don't need me. You've got a company full of Ivy League grads who'd cut each other's throats for a job like that." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the unbreakable facade. "That's exactly why I don't trust them." Silence draped between them, heavy and suffocating. The offer hung in the air, pressing against her, a force wrapped in possibility and risk. Her gaze met his, searching for a crack, a weakness, something that made sense. But there was none, just those sharp, gray eyes and the quiet intensity of a man who never asked, only commanded. And in that moment, Serena realized this wasn't just an offer. It was a test, a gamble, a door cracked open to a world that had never been meant for her, but one she couldn't ignore. Serena's fingers tightened around the envelope, her heart beat heavy in her chest. 6 figures. That kind of money could change everything. No more late rent notices taped to her door, no more juggling 2 jobs, no more nights wondering how she'd make $20 stretch another week. It was a lifeline, yet it felt like a chain. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, clear and unyielding. Never owe these people anything, baby. You know they don't give without taking. Her jaw clenched, defiance simmering beneath her exhaustion. She looked up, meeting Raymond's steady, calculating gaze. "Why me?" she demanded. His expression didn't shift, but something flickered behind those cold, gray eyes, a vulnerability so fleeting it almost seemed imagined. "Because you saw my son," he replied, his voice low, almost strained. "Not my money, not my name, him." The weight of his words pressed against her ribs, tightening her throat. She looked at the envelope one last time before lifting it slowly. "I'll think about it," she muttered. Raymond studied her for a long, silent moment, then offered a curt nod. "Good." And just like that, he turned and left, the click of the door sealing her in with the weight of his offer. She stood there long after he was gone, the envelope feeling heavier than it should, because deep down she knew she wasn't just thinking about it. She was already saying yes. The first day, a different world. Walking into Holt Dynamics felt like trespassing into a world that wasn't built for people like her. The building was a fortress of glass and steel, towering and intimidating. Inside, everything gleamed, polished marble, stainless steel, the cold, metallic scent of money lingering in the air. Serena's department store blazer and thrifted heels felt like an unspoken confession. Eyes followed her as she crossed the lobby, not with curiosity, but with calculation, as if assessing whether she was a mistake that had slipped through the cracks. But she kept her head high, shoulders squared. She had been in rooms where people doubted her before. This would be no different. Raymond's office was a sanctuary of power, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk so pristine it seemed untouched by human hands. He didn't glance up when she walked in, simply gestured to the chair opposite him. "You're late." Serena arched a brow and sat down. "By 2 minutes." Finally, he looked at her, sharp, assessing, a blade disguised as a glance. "That's 2 minutes I don't get back." Serena exhaled, irritation edging her voice. "Do you want me here or not?" Raymond leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "That remains to be seen." Before she could respond, the glass door opened, and a woman stepped inside, composed, polished, a tablet in hand. Her eyes flicked over Serena, a quick, cutting glance that silently asked, "Does she belong here?" Spoiler alert, she had already decided. "Miss Carter," the woman greeted smoothly. "Welcome to Holt Dynamics." Serena's lips curved into a slow, challenging smile. "Oh, we're doing last names? Good to see you again, Ms. Winters." A flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face, a crack in her poised demeanor. But it vanished just as quickly. "I've prepared the reports for the upcoming negotiations with the Orion Group," she said, turning her attention to Raymond. "Would you like me to brief her on company protocols?" Raymond didn't look up. "No, I will." The dismissal was sharp, final. Serena wasn't sure if it was a relief or a warning. Nora nodded, her expression unreadable. But as she reached the door, she glanced back, her gaze resting on Serena just a moment too long. Good luck, she murmured. The words didn't feel like encouragement. They felt like a warning wrapped in politeness. Before Serena could process it, Raymond was already in motion. No small talk, no easing in. He slid a file across the desk, his voice clipped and efficient. Orion Group, he began. They won a contract that cuts labor costs by outsourcing jobs overseas. It means layoffs. Thousands. Serena's eyes scanned the pages, the legal jargon curling around harsh realities. Her stomach twisted. And you want me to do what? She asked, voice steady but wary. Raymond's gaze sharpened, his expression unreadable. Find a solution. One that serves the company and the people affected. That's what you're here for. His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. For a moment, she considered what it meant to sit across from a man who held power like a weapon. Someone who didn't ask, only decided. Serena's fingers tightened around the file. If this was a test, she couldn't afford to fail. Serena's jaw tightened as she studied Raymond across the vast, polished desk. The city's skyline stretched behind him, a glittering reminder of power that people like him rarely questioned. She had seen this view before, from the ground up, where dreams collided with reality. Convince them not to, Raymond's voice was steady, unwavering. Serena leaned back, crossing her arms. So, let me get this straight. You brought me in because you think I can what? Charm these billionaires into growing a conscience. Raymond didn't blink. No, I brought you in because I think you understand something they don't. She narrowed her eyes, skepticism sharpening her gaze. And what's that? Raymond leaned forward, the slightest shift in his demeanor. People who have nothing to lose fight the hardest. The word struck a nerve, a buried truth that echoed through her bones. She stared at him, caught between defiance and understanding. Finally, she exhaled, a dry, humorless laugh escaping her. You know, she muttered, you talk in riddles a lot for someone who runs a tech empire. For a split second, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. The moment slipped away before it could settle. Meetings at noon, Raymond said, rising from his seat. Try not to be late. Serena rolled her eyes, but she didn't argue. She had a job to do. The meeting, a battlefield of power. The conference room was a fortress of glass and steel, designed to intimidate, to unsettle. The air was cold, sterile. Serena took her seat beside Raymond at the long mahogany table, facing three men in tailored suits. Their confidence radiated off them, the kind that came from knowing they could alter lives with a signature. At the center was Philip Langford, silver-haired, 60, his arrogance a legacy. His eyes brushed over Serena without pause, a dismissal she had felt too many times before. Raymond began without preamble. So, you want to move production to Taiwan? Lower costs, boost efficiency, Raymond stated, his voice measured. I say it dismantles a workforce that's built this company's backbone for over a decade. Langford's thin-lipped smile barely touched his eyes. Raymond, it's not personal. It's just business. Not personal. Serena's pulse quickened. She had heard those words before, when her landlord raised the rent because developers wanted to revitalize the neighborhood, when her mother lost her job at the textile plant to cheaper overseas labor. The phrase had always been a shield for those who dealt damage but never endured it. She smiled, but there was steel beneath it. Funny, she said, tilting her head. It's always just business until it's your job on the line. Langford's gaze snapped to hers, the first time he truly saw her. Raymond didn't interfere, he simply watched. And you are? Langford asked, voice edged with irritation. Serena Carter. Holt Dynamics. He scanned her, a swift, dismissive assessment. She had been disregarded by men like him before, men who saw her skin, her gender, her background, and decided her worth in an instant. But she didn't flinch. Langford leaned back, a smug smirk curling his lips. "Look, sweetheart, I get it. You think we're the villains here, but this is about numbers. It's about what makes sense." "Sweetheart." The word felt like a slap. Serena leaned in, her voice cold and precise. "Great. Let's talk numbers." She slid a document across the table. "This is a breakdown of what happens when you offshore production. Sure, you cut costs now, but in 3 years, when labor demands rise, that cheap manufacturing hub gets expensive. You'll spend millions restructuring, rehiring, and dealing with PR disasters when the headlines read, 'American workers betrayed for profit.'" Her gaze held his, unyielding. "That's not a guess, it's market analysis. You can make the smart choice now, or you can explain to your investors why your short-term gains just cost them their long-term returns." Silence coiled through the room, heavy and tense. Langford's jaw tightened as he picked up the document, his eyes scanning the pages. Raymond remained motionless, a quiet observer, but Serena felt the weight of his approval, a silent acknowledgement that she had shifted the course. Langford finally set the document down, his expression unreadable. "We'll revisit the proposal." Raymond nodded, his voice measured. "See that you do." The meeting dissolved quickly after that, Langford and his associates retreating from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Serena and Raymond alone in the lingering silence. She could feel his gaze, a quiet study of the woman who had just challenged a man used to silencing others. "Impressive," Raymond finally said, his tone unreadable. Serena didn't smile. She simply gathered her things, a steady calm in her chest. "Like I said," she replied, "people with nothing to lose fight the hardest." As she walked away, the glass walls of Holt Dynamics reflected a woman who no longer felt out of place in this fortress of power. She was here, and she was not leaving quietly. Serena's footsteps echoed through the sleek halls of Holt Dynamics, each step a steady defiance against a world that had always tried to silence her. For 2 months, she had carved out a space in this fortress of influence, a place where faces like hers were often seen as tokens rather than talents. She had proven herself not just to Raymond, but to a boardroom of men who never saw her coming. She was no corporate pet project. She was a force. But victories at the top were fragile. And today, everything felt like it was about to shatter. A trap laid bare. She had just returned from a client meeting when Nora intercepted her in the hallway. Her face was a mask of urgency, eyes sharp and guarded. "We have a problem," Nora's voice cut through the office's hum like a blade. Serena frowned, her pulse quickening. "Define problem." Nora didn't answer. Instead, she handed Serena a printed email. The moment Serena's eyes landed on the words, her stomach twisted. A company report, classified financial data, leaked to the press. And the email forwarding it bore her name. The air around her seemed to thicken, heavy and oppressive. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. "This isn't mine," she whispered, her voice brittle. Nora's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I know, but someone wants it to be." Serena's mind raced. She had seen this before, a scapegoat crafted to perfection. A black woman in a powerful, predominantly white space didn't get the privilege of innocence. She was guilty the moment they decided she was. "Who else has seen this?" she managed, forcing her voice steady. "Raymond. And the board," Nora replied softly. Her breath caught. The board. The very people she had fought to prove her worth to. The ones who had watched her shatter expectations only to silently hope she would falter. The crossroads. Raymond's office felt colder than usual, an unyielding expanse of steel and glass. He stood behind his desk, hands clasped, his face unreadable. Those sharp, gray eyes bore into her, calculating, weighing. Serena laid the email flat on the desk, her fingers trembling slightly. "This isn't me, Raymond." He didn't glance at the paper. He didn't need to. "I want to believe that," he said quietly, each word measured, deliberate. "But this is a serious breach. Millions in exposure, stock drops, investigations. You understand what this means?" Serena leaned forward, palms pressed firmly on the polished wood. "I understand exactly what it means. I also understand that whoever did this knew what they were doing. I was the easy target, the outsider, the black woman with too much confidence. Who's going to believe me over an executive who's been here for a decade?" Raymond's expression didn't falter, but there was a flicker, a shadow of understanding that passed through his gaze. The silence between them was suffocating, stretching longer than it should have. "Do you think I did this?" she demanded, her voice thick with disbelief and frustration. Raymond held her gaze, steady and unblinking. "No." The breath she had been holding finally escaped, a tremor of relief. But his next words sent a chill through her. "But the board does." Her mind spiraled. The weight of the accusation, the inevitability of the blame, it felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She glanced back at Raymond, searching for a thread of hope. "So what now?" she whispered. "What happens now?" Raymond's jaw tightened. His hand ran slowly over the stubble on his chin, the only sign of unease. "Now we find the real leak." Serena's eyes widened. "We?" Raymond stepped around the desk, his gaze steady, his tone firm. "So, not just you. Not just me. We." For the first time since she entered, the ice in her chest cracked. He wasn't abandoning her, he was standing with her. The realization sent a surge of resolve through her veins. "Nora is already tracing the email source," Raymond continued. "Whoever did this covered their tracks well, but not perfectly. We'll have to be smarter." Serena folded her arms, the weight of vulnerability fading, replaced by a defiance that burned through her fear. "And if we don't find them in time? If the board decides to cut me loose?" Raymond's jaw tightened. His voice was low, edged with a determination she had never heard before. "Then we make them regret it." The words hung between them, a promise, a threat, a vow. For the first time, Serena believed him. Whoever had set her up had underestimated the strength of a woman who had learned to survive. Unmasking the enemy. The search for the truth was relentless. Sleepless nights and strained eyes, Serena and Nora pored over server logs and email traces. The web of deceit unraveled slowly, too slowly, but persistence clawed through the carefully laid defenses. The breakthrough came at dawn, a secondary account, a shadow of an executive's email. Tied to Eric, a man who had seen Serena's rise as a threat. A man who had always whispered diversity higher when he thought she wasn't listening. Raymond sat beside her as they reviewed the evidence, undeniable, irrefutable. A surge of vindication coursed through her, fierce and overwhelming. "What do we do now?" she asked, voice steady but laced with fire. Raymond's eyes gleamed with a sharp edge. "Now, we show them what happens when they try to bury the wrong woman." Serena didn't just survive, she prevailed. When the dust settled, she stood not as a symbol, not as a token, but as a force to be reckoned with. The boardroom that had once weighed her worth now respected her resolve. And those who had tried to sabotage her would forever remember the lesson she had carved into their polished halls. Never underestimate a woman who has had to fight to be seen. The sun had barely risen when Serena and Nora found the final piece of evidence. An email thread buried deep in a shadow account tied directly to Eric Calloway. A man with a decade of influence at Holt Dynamics, known for keeping his hands spotless while others took the fall. By morning, they had enough to bring him down. Serena didn't wait to be summoned like a guilty suspect. She stormed into the boardroom with the weight of truth burning in her chest. Eyes followed her, polished men in tailored suits, their gazes piercing and judgmental. They expected her to crumble, to apologize, to beg. She had no intention of giving them that satisfaction. Raymond sat at the head of the table, his face an impenetrable mask. Across from him, a board member with a thin-lipped smirk gestured to an empty seat. "Miss Carter, I assume you know why you're here." Serena stood tall, her heartbeat steady. "I do," she replied firmly. "And I assume you all know you're about to make a very expensive mistake." A flicker of amusement crossed Raymond's face, but he said nothing. "Miss Carter," the board member began, his voice laced with condescension. Serena cut him off. "I was the easy target, wasn't I? The new hire, the outsider, the black woman who dared to think she belonged in your world. The one you could pin this mess on and sweep away quietly." She took a breath, then slid a thick folder across the table. The silence was sharp as the board members skimmed the documents, traced emails, bank transfers, call logs with reporters, all tied to Calloway. Not her. Eric Calloway's face turned ashen. Panic flickered in his eyes. "This is absurd," he spat, his voice edged with desperation. "She's bluffing." Serena turned slowly to Raymond, a brow raised. "Am I?" Raymond's gaze was cold, cutting. His voice struck like steel. "No, she's not." The words landed like a blow. Calloway's mouth snapped shut, his face frozen in disbelief. Raymond stood, his movements measured, adjusting his cufflinks as if dismissing a trivial inconvenience. "Effective immediately, Eric Calloway is terminated. Full legal action will be pursued." He let the weight of his words settle before addressing the rest of the room. "And if anyone else in this company thinks they can play the same game, let this be your warning." The silence that followed was absolute. Serena didn't need to smile. The truth had spoken for her. 2 weeks later, Serena stood beside Raymond at Daniel's high school graduation. The boy grinned up from his wheelchair, his diploma clutched tightly, a symbol of triumph. "I told you I'd make it," he declared, his chest puffed out with pride. Serena laughed, ruffling his hair. "Never doubted it for a second." Raymond watched them, a softness breaking through his usually impenetrable exterior. "You did good, Carter," he murmured. She smirked, her confidence unshaken. "Damn right I did." Daniel glanced between them, his eyes bright with curiosity. "So, are you two going to hug or something?" Raymond sighed, an exaggerated exasperation. "Absolutely not." Serena rolled her eyes. "God, no." Daniel's laughter rang out, a pure, joyful sound. For the first time in a long while, Serena felt like she had built something real, something that went beyond boardrooms and suits. She wasn't just surviving. She was shaping a legacy. Years later, Serena Carter sat in an office with her name etched on the door, Vice President of Corporate Strategy. What had started as a job, a challenge, had transformed into a mission. Under her leadership, Holt Dynamics expanded ethical labor practices, established mentorship programs, and forged partnerships with minority-owned businesses. Across town, a new community center bore the name Carter Holt Foundation, dedicated to education and job opportunities for underserved youth. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Daniel, now a college freshman, stood beside her. His grin was still that of the boy who once received a free meal at a diner, a small act of kindness that had sown seeds for something greater. And as the crowd applauded, Serena knew that this was just the beginning. She had fought to be seen, to be heard, and now no one could ignore her.